So, welcome to this part of the section. My lecture is, as you see, towards an axiological view of reality. Axiology is, as you know, the system of values or hierarchy of values in philosophy, and with extremism and epistemology, it is connected by the idea that how we know and what we know is very much influenced by our view of the dignity of what we know, whether we have respect, or we just think there is a monistic reality in the sense that there is seamless reality, and without axiological view of things, we have no ontological basis for respect, and not to speak about worship. Now, worship and respect is very important, if not inevitable, I would say, if we want to have a discussion which is respectful and constructive. I will start with two quotations. One is how Blaise Pascal, who is a well-known physicist and theologian, how he approached knowledge, and this is from Emile Boutreau Pascal, and he says this, and then Boutreau, Pascal, when about to write, used to kneel down and pray the infinite being, so to subdue every part of him unto himself, that when he was thus brought low, the divine force might enter into him. By self-abasement, he prepared himself for the receiving of inspirations. So, obviously, this is epistemological topic, how Pascal, when he tried or wanted to communicate some knowledge, get some knowledge, he worshipped and expected the infinite being, God, to speak to him, to help him to subdue every part of him, actually, which is a very strong expression. And of course, I think that the key word here is worship. So there is one approach, I would say axiological approach to reality, where someone who is a mathematical genius, physicist and theologians, knows that knowledge comes from higher source. Now there is another approach. There is not a scientist, but very well-known Scottish-American industrialist, Andrew Carnegie, and his approach to reality, to knowledge, was quite different from Pascal. This quotation from a book by Joseph Fraser Wall, Andrew Carnegie, it's his biography, and he quotes this man Carnegie. Light came as in a flood, and all was clear. It sounds very evangelical, strong experience. Not only had I got rid of theology and the supernatural, but I had found the truth of evolution. All is well, since all grows better, became my motto, my true source of comfort. Man was not created with an instinct for his own degradation, but from the lower he had risen to the higher forms. Nor is there any conceivable end to his march to perfection. Quite a hope. His face is turned to the light, he stands in the sun and looks upward. Key word I would say here is immanence. So there is the view where, a monistic view I would say of reality, where hope comes from inside. Of course, in an axiological view, this is very arbitrary. You can see that humanity goes forward, or you can see or think that you can be that it goes downward. So this is very arbitrary. Of course, I don't agree with this, but our point here in this lecture is not to criticize, but to show how these basically two extreme positions can start or continue or do some respectful discussion. The problem is that in extremism, these positions of immanence or worship get farther and farther away, and they sort of throw stones over a fence. So we don't communicate, we just throw a stone of some kind of criticism or even some foul language. So the method I want to use is what was called in the past saving the appearances. Now, saving the appearances is saving like salvation, appearances like phenomena. This phrase used by Simplicius in the 6th century commentary on Aristotle, the Selo or the Kailo, continued to dominate astronomy down to the time of Copernicus. The same appearances could be saved, explained, this word, they use the word same, by two or more quite different hypotheses. They were used as models for calculations. This is a very modern physical word in physics. For explaining phenomena, appearances, with no claims to correspond with physical reality. So this is from Owen Barfoot saying, this is the book. And other modern worldviews that try to save the appearances to explain reality are just quickly idealism, physicalism, dualism, emergent dualism, materialism, emergence materialism, and it's a plethora of many other. So I'm not trying to give you all of these. But my point is that saving the appearances is sort of offering another model to try out. So in the discussion where we do not evangelize directly, we just present the biblical picture of reality as a hypothesis. Of course, it's not hypothesis for me. This is testimony that I see it as a true picture. But if I discuss in apologetic milieu, in some situation where I discuss with somebody who does not believe, I am using this as what theory of all these and others is better suited to explain reality. So the biblical picture of reality is used here in this lecture as a hypothesis to be checked for its saving the appearances or ability to save the experiences in experiential religion. So we can offer this picture of reality and say there is another theory on the market, and I am not pushing it. I'm just saying my testimony is that it works for me. I believe it, but you can try it if you have an open mind. And this axiological view, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many other believers, is better suited to explanation of the whole reality. So now a series of charts or pictures where we show how this should or could work. So the first is philosophical knowledge of reality. This is usually given in these three basic parts: ontology, metaphysics, sometimes metaphysics used, called epistemology, how do we know, and axiology, what is good, beautiful, or sublime. In biblical view of reality, we have to start with ontology. Of course, modern philosophers say, or have a very bad view of ontology. They say we do not know what exists, if there anything is. How we know what we know, it's a problem which was basically defined by Immanuel Kant. And we have to be aware of this in this talk. But if we say there is nothing, we don't know what there is, so how can we know what we know? Simply knowledge of we don't know what is sort of nonsensical. So we suggest that let's start with ontology, biblical ontology, and we will see how it works. Basically, physical hypotheses work that way. You state a hypothesis, and then you use it. If it works, it's confirmed. If it doesn't work, it's disproved. So let's start with ontology, which is presupposing Christian realism, what is real, and then we continue with epistemology, and in Christian view, a biblical view of reality, there are different approaches to knowing reality. You do not know the same way, say, a rock, and you do not know the same way somebody in communication, if you have a vis-a-vis communication with a human being, or you do not know the same way God. But I am coming to this later. Methods of knowing, and axiology is based on ontology. And axiology is not something arbitrary, where we say, okay, humans are higher beings than, say, cats, because we like it so, okay? So we say, a biblical view of reality is saying that axiology is based on ontology, and there are things or beings that are good, beautiful, sublime, and there are things which are common. Okay, so we come to this later, but it is very important for our method, how we think. Now, what I call a Christian graded dualism is a very important very important discussion of how reality is constituted. The first order dualism in Christian view of the world or reality is uncreated, which is Trinity, and created dualism. So between uncreated and created is gap, which is basically epistemologically unbridgeable. God can communicate himself, but we cannot bridge it by our own effort. It's so different, uncreated reality, that only through the Word of God of Revelation we can somehow approach God or approach reality of uncreated reality. So uncreated reality is sovereign over created. So it's not dualism like Persian dualism, where these two realities, two gods, are simply of the same hierarchical, I would say, dignity or power or eternity. So these are not two balanced or equal sort of realities. That's very important. So uncreated reality is God is sovereign over created reality. Uncreated reality is unifying power or unifying principle of the whole reality. So created and uncreated is unified into one reality by the sovereignty of God, but not by being. It's not by ontology, but by the word, by the power of the word of God. So this is the first order dualism, but there is second order dualism, which is spiritual and natural. So created reality is spiritual and physical or natural, but spiritual rules over physical. So this is not Cartesian dualism. This is very important to say, because Cartesian dualism has problem that body and mind are substances that cannot communicate together. Simply, a substance cannot influence another substance in the philosophy of Descartes. Yeah? So this is not Cartesian dualism, this is Christian second order dualism, which says that spiritual is ruling over physical. Of course, there are many problems. How is it done or how it works? And I don't think we can explain it, but let's not be too shy here, because I think physicists cannot explain how gravity works, gravitation, or how electrical field works. Or, there are so many things. We know they work, but do not know how. So I don't know how my soul makes my hands moving. I don't know, but it does, and I'm using it. Okay. So let's not be too afraid of saying that spiritual rules over physical. Of course, not everywhere, and I cannot move my eyes that table or white board or something. So there are limits here, of course. And the third grade of dualism, which is very important as well, is between good and evil. Here, a very important comment is that there are things which are neutral. Not only good and evil, but there are things that are neutral, and they can become good if they are used for God, or they can become evil if they are used for Satan or for the negative evil force. So we need to realize that reality is not just dual here, but there are three areas, like good, evil, and neutral. Of course, this is third order dualism because this is not created. This is something that happened, what the Bible calls the fall. Okay? So this is also temporary. That's why it's not a necessary difference. It's something which is became of human, you can say, free will. Well, free will is a loaded term, but we are not going to discuss it here. Now, in this reality, which is described this way here, a human being is both spiritual and physical. And this picture tries, maybe not very nicely, to show how epistemology works through spirit-soul, which in one theological opinion is the same substance, and I think it's the same substance, just different functions, and body. Okay, so anthropology describes, biblical anthropology describes a human being in this red, what is it, square? It's not square, it's oblong something. It's a human being, and by spirit and soul it is related to things in reality that are personal, free, eternal, supernatural, transcendent, and God. Yeah? So this is open. As I said, we do not have a direct approach to God. We have to come to Him and wait by worship for His revelation. So human beings are in between personal, spiritual creation and impersonal, nature, physical, which is described, or its principle is determinism. Things, you can determine how things work. Of course, we are aware of particle physics, where things work through stochastic processes and so on, but basically these natural sciences work through determined physical laws, and this is temporal. Yeah? So we have eternal and temporal, and this is very important that human beings are in between. We are a bridge between the uncreated and the created reality, which causes many problems if we do not know that. Because sometimes we try to use this way of epistemology in this area, in this realm, and theologians maybe try to use this epistemological processes in this realm. And it doesn't work. And of course, when you try to communicate between human beings, you have to use what I will in a moment show, empathy, which is neither deterministic nor you do not wait for revelation. It's basically by talk. So spirit, soul, and human beings relates to the spiritual world and creates personal relations. And body relates to the impersonal and temporal, and basically these are natural sciences. So if we discuss, now all of us know that today natural sciences are the kings, queens of university, of science and so on, so we suffer, but I think theology sort of deserves this suffering, because in the Middle Ages tried to rule the whole university as philosophical theology, which wasn't very nice, as we may know from history. So biblical place for humans is very important in epistemology. I think it's quite clear from here. Maybe a nice passage from Mark Twain, how theological thinking is absurd in when you use it for natural sciences. In the Mark Twain book, Yankee from Connecticut.
Connecticut Yankee from King Arthur, in King Arthur's Court.
Yeah, Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's, thank you, court. Yeah, it's a very nice book, and there is a monk who is standing over a well, and this Yankee asks him how deep that well is. How deep is that well? And he says, how can I know if nobody tells me? So he uses expectation for revelation about the well which he can measure. So that's stupid. And of course Mark Twain was an atheist and he was ridiculing theology there. But we must be aware that we should use different epistemological processes or methods in different realms. So this is trying to show how this could be developed. So, as we saw, physical reality is known basically by senses, and we use a method of experiment. Spiritual, created spiritual, which is basically human beings, but also, say, angels or demons or other beings that are spiritual or have a soul. Basically, we need to use language and empathy. Now, empathy is a big word in psychology, and I don't know enough about it, and we do not have time to discuss it, but empathy, of course, can be also counter-transference, which is dangerous, and that's why it's very important to use language and to listen, but you cannot understand other human being if you cannot empathize. So, empathy is not deterministic, it's not experimental, it's something which is very, very human. So this is the epistemological channel of language, listening, and there is spiritual and uncreated being God. Now, modern atheism, there are books about atheistic spiritualities. Very interesting. So some atheists protest that they are not devoid of spirituality and that they know what spirituality is, although they do not believe God. So I think they sort of show that the sense of awe, sense of worship, sense of wonder is common to all human beings. And even atheists can experience that. Of course, they do not worship in the sense, biblical sense, that reality. They do not pray to it. They do not wait for revelation. They do not have authoritative texts or something. But they have this sense of awe or wonder. So that sort of confirms that all of us as human beings have different ways of knowing, and that this reality we meet with our senses, with our mind, and with our beings, there are different genera of this reality. So reality is not one, as I said, seamless substance or something, but there are different genera, and we need different epistemological channels to know it. And in my, this was my goal, my aim, to show that we need axiological epistemology, because if I talk to some human being, I cannot experiment with it. I have to try to empathize, to use respect, to talk, even if I am on the other side of some divide, like say, believer, unbeliever. So this is the aim of this lecture. So, concluding remarks. We hardly can expect that one epistemology will sway the whole field of knowledge. I think it's obvious from what is published that there are so many epistemologies, so many approaches to reality, that I cannot say, well, we shall produce one persuasive picture of reality and everybody will believe it. That's eschatological. But we can testify to something and offer it as saving the appearances. Yeah? So, this philosopher Deleuze, 20th century, I think he is no longer alive, he said that real philosopher, when you suggest a debate to him, he runs away. He just doesn't want to debate. Yeah? So, it's quite nicely put. From the epistemologies on the market, it is logical to choose the one that is in the best way saves the appearances, explains the phenomena. So this is biblical epistemology. I have tried it. There are several here who have tried it, and it works. So we can testify it works, but respectfully see others who do not believe it, and we know that this respect is expected from us by God. We shouldn't be somehow imperialistic about it. Whatever is our choice, we should debate other people's choices with respect. Thank you for your attention. And